Okay, so we all need to build new conceptual frameworks in order to fully be who we are. And who we really are is that consciousness which experiences joy, as I described in my first video. Okay, but why do we experience that joy? What is it? What is joy really? So it's just a feeling that comes in, it's like a bunch of chemicals? Not exactly. Because essential to that, if you've experienced that, if you can remember experiencing that, is a feeling of liberation. It's like the flower opens and here I am. Here is my full self, joyful and alive. And so that energy is just perfect because not only are we completely ourselves, not only that, but we're also through that joy. And we really, if we explore that joy, if the joy lasts more than a few seconds, we understand that we're connected to everything around us. And and that's a good thing. And it feels great to be connected and to be fully ourselves. So that's a foundation, let's say the foundation stone of our conceptual framework. Now, if you're completely joyful, you don't need a conceptual framework. You're just that way. You're like a beacon. You're like a sun coming up and filling everybody with love and joy and fulfillment, whatever. But there's very few people, and there are some people who do have that kind of energy, who experience joy all the time or most of the time. But why don't we experience that? Well, we don't experience that because we're programmed. We're programmed from the time we are born and even before to take in our environment, see what works and what doesn't work, see what we need to survive physically and emotionally. And from that, we discover that there are certain rules and regulations that we have to follow, certain frameworks that we have to accept. And so human society has been fueled by that that sort of programming, if you want to call it that, that exists. And often in societies and healthy societies, that programming is specifically there in order to nurture who you really are. That this is the point of it. There's no point, there's no other point of it. But when a society like ours and others in the past are mainly about power, mainly about fear, which is power, the urge and the urge for power is often, but not always, about fear. Uh, I'm afraid that if I don't protect myself and I don't have power over others and can control them, that they're going to get me. They're going to get what I have. They're going to get my family, whatever. It's mainly unconscious, but that's what's behind this whole power thing. And when you have a society that's based on that, so a society based on money, which is the Western, which is in the Western world and much of the world, the westernized parts of the world, which are usually not only in the West, Europe and United States and all, Australia, New Zealand and all Japan, South Korea, all these places, that's probably essential, important part of their culture, but less so than our Europe and United States. But they basically are about money. So money is the means of which you judge other people. And money is ultimately about power. So if I have money, I'm going to have power. And this is more the case today than it's been probably at any other time in history. And not that it hasn't been in the past quite a bit, but it's as an ethic, it is dominant because we lack any kind of religious focus. Even the so-called Christians who, oh, I believe in the Bible and Jesus and I'm saved, even those people, when push comes to shove, and I live in the South, so that's what my experience is that yeah, that's important, but basically when push comes to shove, it's about the money. It's about buying a new jet ski. It's about traveling. It's about all the clothes and cars and all this kind of stuff. That's what's really important. It's very rare to see anyone in the South or elsewhere that just decides, oh, I'm just going to live very simply and give my extra money to others. It happens. There are people like that, but they're not powerful. They're not considered important. They're not praised. They're not given celebrity status, which they would be in some other societies. And traditional societies like India, for example, that might be a big thing in the past, not so much today, but in the past, that virtue and saintlyhood and uh, going towards enlightenment and understanding and teaching others to feel better and about themselves and experiencing joy and all that. They may have been a big part of the culture in the past, but not so much anymore from what I understand. But it's there, that line of thinking is there in the society itself, even though it's beginning to break down. So the point is that the structure that we need to create now, because let's face it, we're facing a lot of problems in the world. We're facing, in just in the United States, we're facing homelessness, drug addiction, despair, depression, anxiety at a very high level, loneliness is it's it. I've been in traditional cultures. I've lived in more traditional places, and loneliness was never a part of anything. People were usually in community groups for good or bad, and it can be a bad thing too. But the fact is that they didn't live only for themselves. I think I may have told the story, but I had a friend who was a African professor of French literature because he was a francophone or something like, I think it was French literature. It's been so many decades ago, who told me that he felt sorry for Americans because we have never been initiated into something that you can't escape from, like a tribe. So he knew, and he knows, I'm sure, or at least unless it's changed drastically, he knew he had a place. If he went crazy, if he was sick, if he had a drug addiction problem, if he went, it wasn't an accident and couldn't talk, and anything terrible happening to him, someone in family or tribe had his back. Period. It wasn't a question. He knew for a fact that that was the case. He didn't have to worry about anything. He didn't have to worry about losing all his money. He would be taken care of. He didn't have to worry about that, any of the kind of things that people worry about every day. If he was sick, he knew he would be taken care of to the best of the capacity of the family and the tribe. That was the reality in most of the world for most of human history. And yes, you had kings and queens and emperors and this and that contesting, and that was at one level. But at the level of the normal person, generally speaking, unless they were dodging invading armies, which happened more in Europe than anywhere else, by the way, our Western culture is founded on a lot of that, a lot of war, a lot of conflict. But even then, most people, for most of the time, had the security of being part of a family and part of a tribe or village or whatever you want to call it. So that's very important. And it is because we do not have that, that is the reason we need to create a new conceptual framework. I often call it a mythological framework to be more accurate, because we live within these sort of high level um, models of existence that you see in mythology. So mythology is a structure. It's not just something stupid. It's not a bunch of lies. It's not a bunch of untruths. It's just a structure within which you can exist. The scientific reality of it doesn't enter into it. As for scientific reality, let's make this as clear as possible about our society. And I think I'm talking about European society as well. In fact, even more so, but less them, more the United States. Yeah, I think more us. We don't live by an intellectual structure of reason. We think we're scientific. We brag about that, but we're not. The fact of the matter is, look at the movies. The movies we watch and are made are not documentaries and, you know, accurate depictions of reality. They're fantasies, they're myths. And all the important movies are mythological movies, and they play at our emotions. All political discourse is emotional. All, you listen to President Trump's State of the Union address. He was just throwing out this myth after another. Almost none of what he said was true in any scientific sense or any reasonable sense, but it was a feel good thing. He was trying to make first of himself feel good, but he was also, I think, trying to make the rest of us feel good. We're successful, we're doing fine, never been better. Well, it's not a bad thing to be positive. In fact, I think it's much better. But as I've said in past videos, we can't ignore the dark side. The dark side, not only of society, of culture, of whatever, but of ourselves. So we can't deny the satanic, quote unquote, which is in traditional parlance, Satan means the enemy. And you can see this, as I've talked before about in the story of Job. So God and Job had a bet. Was Job going to stay faithful or not? Well, the naysayer was Satan. He's the enemy. He's always the naysayer. So if I say it's important to be joyful, that's who we really are. Satan will say, "Oh yeah, well look at you. Look what you've done. What you look at all this. You hurt this person and you hurt that person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." So I'm going to go, "Oh God, I'm so ashamed. I did do some bad things in life. I did hurt other people. I didn't come to the help of people when I could have. I didn't care. I was so self-involved in my own life at that time that I didn't really reach out where when I could have, whether it was in relationships or whether it was with friends or whether it was just strangers I happened to hurt in one way, or strangers, sort of anybody that I might have hurt, um, intentionally even or unintentionally. We've all had, at least I have, I've had that experience. I've made people unhappy, and I wanted to make people unhappy at times. I wanted to harm them. I wanted to hurt them. So, not always, but that's not a dominant thing in my life. Thank God it wasn't, and it isn't. But it's part of my life. It's part of my past life, and that makes up who I am in terms of the conditioning, in terms of my false self, what we call the false self, as opposed to the true self, which is again that part that experiences joy, that is connected to God. It is God within us. So where's the kingdom of heaven? It's within us and without us. But we can't understand the outside kingdom of heaven without experiencing that kingdom within us, without experiencing God and divinity, whatever you want to call it, the source, some people call it. So for me, that's essential because I know that I'm connected to God that is connected to everything. So that is why that joyful sense can do that, can connect us to everything, connect us to the higher levels. In fact, the sort of simple areas of what some people call the astral level, the spiritual level, that connection to that divine inside of me protects me from evil spirits, from all these, they exist. These nasty little things that feed on your negative emotions, they feed them. So when you have a negative emotion and you're angry or you're upset and you're worried or you're fearful or whatever, these little creatures that exist on a spiritual level, maybe they're not, quote, maybe they don't have any existence in our terms in the three-dimensional world, but they do exist. They do feed. You can clearly experience this once you just look at yourself. As I described, I think about meditation. Meditation is about observing what is really going on, not your ideal, but what's really going on. So, what your direct experience when you realize this dark stuff is that then you feel shame. Oh no, what did I do? And then you're laying a cloud over yourself that says there's a label here. Oh boy, look at that idiot. Look at that immoral person who's done this and that, and he's done that and this and that. Everybody experiences that. It's not unique to me, not unique to you. It's just the way it is. And that's the struggle. We're always struggling between our true self and that satanic energy that goes, yeah, 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 you're just an idiot. You don't do anything right. Okay, fine. That's something my father used to say about me, kind of, right? I mean, that usually parents will say these things. You're bad, you didn't do this, and you didn't do that. And we take that in childhood. Now, they didn't mean necessarily these bad things, but that's just how they were programmed themselves. And they just pass on that negativity to you. That's how I feel about my parents. They just passed on the negativity that they experienced with their parents and their lives. And in the case of my mother being in between wars and being bombed and all this kind of stuff, yeah, that's all something that now is part of me or been passed down to me in terms of negative emotions. So, in order to combat or to alleviate those negative emotions, you just go back to center. As I learned in Aikido, when you fall, when you're thrown, you get back up, find your center again. It's a discipline. It really is. You just fall down and you don't go, "Oh man, I really goofed up. I really fell for that trick." No. You don't think about that. You just go back to center because theoretically you're in a fighting position, so you can't afford to waste your time castigating yourself for a bad technique, right? So you have to be present. You have to get back up, center, and be ready for the next situation, the next blow, the next throw, the next whatever it comes at you. You just all the practice you do in order to get to the state, the physical practice, the technique, the learning to center, that's all something that is very useful and helps in that type of situation. But that's only for me, it was only a way of learning that in life I have to do that. So when life throws me, and it's thrown me plenty, I need to just get back up and center and then be ready for doing something, taking an action, or not, but as the case may be. Not that I do. I often fail. I often sit and grouse for a while, sometimes for days. And or like the feeling I would often have is I'd want to go in bed and put the covers over my head and just zone out or take a drug or do something like that. So again, centered in who we are. When life throws us, we get back up and then we look around so that our attention's good so we can see what's going on. If we're worried about ourselves, if we're feeling guilty about stuff, we cannot see, we're so focused inward, we can't see the outside world. And the requirement for human life is to be connected to that outside world in some whatever way is you know, our fate or preference or whatever you want to call it. Our centeredness is not there just for no reason. It's there to center and observe, increase our consciousness so we can see further. In fact, in one teacher showed us how we can actually see what's in back of us. I know that sounds weird, but we did these exercises and they were pretty good. We were all pretty good at doing that because we believed we could, maybe. Maybe we were imagining it, but really, the exercise enabled us to see something that wasn't necessarily sight that we could see in back, and that's the one of the interesting parts of the movie, The Seven Samurai, where the test was that they would lure a fighter or a samurai into this dwelling or barn or whatever it was, and they would lure them in, and then there would be this guy in back of the door going to bonk them on the head. If they could see it, in other words, they had no way of visually seeing it. They could just sense that you were there going to bonk them on the head. they were going to be part of the group, just to which the whole story was that they would come together and save this village that was being attacked by bandits constantly. So some of them went through that test, some of them didn't, and so that was the test. And so we can actually sense things once we're more aware. And the practice of the samurai was really to focus on that awareness, so they could see in the back and the sides without visually seeing. So they could do that. That's why they would be much better warriors than if you could just see what's out front just with the eyes. You had to be able to sense it. And there's a whole bunch of stuff about how you do that. But but it's mainly practice. You just first of all know that it's possible to do, and then you practice it. So I have to practice being centered automatically, almost, or consciously, or oh my God, I'm not centered. I could feel guilty. That would be Satan. Ah, you feel guilty. Ah, you didn't do it. Look, you're not centered. You're just useless. You don't have any discipline. Ah, okay. Satan may be saying all that stuff to you. Remember, not the spiritual Satan necessarily, although the big deal guy, but just that voice inside of your head that yammers at you and tries to bring you down. And we all have it, by the way. I don't I've never heard of anybody not having it, unless they've disciplined it out of themselves, which is possible that voice is subdued. So in my case, that voice is much less than it ever was in my life in more recent years through processes. All right, so let's get to this conceptual framework. So being centered and observing the outside world, we can begin to actually build this framework by seeing the things more clearly. And for me, I think it's important to understand that the society that we live in is toxic to those of us who want to be joyful and centered and connect with others and connect with the deity or God or divine or source, whatever you want to call it. Uh, for me, it's angels because that's kind of what I'm connected to and have been. I know they're there. I interact with them, so I ask them to help me, and they do. But it's not like I want $1 million, and they'll like create a situation where $1 million comes up for me, and yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. It has to do with what I'm here for. So my prayer to God and to the angels is to help me to do what it is I'm here to do. And often what we're here to do is not quite obvious. So that's the second part, essentially, of this framework, is to realize we're here to do something. And we need to kind of, get into this situation, this discipline of being centered, of meditating, of connecting to that higher level. That will give us that mission, or it'll be made clear to us what that is by our what gives us joy, if nothing else, right? What our preferences are. Why do I prefer this and not that? So it's important. So if I prefer this, and if I have a sense I'm kind of driven towards this direction, well, maybe that's the direction I need to go in. The other thing is we need to understand that we can't judge it based on social mores. Because if we judge it based on social mores, we lose our thread, we lose our centeredness, because those mores are falling apart. Normally, it would be fine. I should feel guilty if I violate the community, that community trust that we form. But we have no communities, or very few of us really have what I would call healthy communities. And this is not good. This is not sustainable. Yeah, sure, for a few decades we can sustain that, but eventually we have to understand not only are we individuals, but we're also members of communities. Even if we don't have one, if we don't have a real community that interacts and is connected, and that if I fall down, someone will pick me up, not just family, not just a spouse, not just a child or one of my children, but there's a community that will sustain me and some sustain them. There's no such thing for most of us beyond maybe immediate family and maybe a little bit more friends, coworkers. But look at our culture. For example, if I'm working someplace, then, oh, I have an opportunity to go to LA to work for this great company, this record company, to be a producer, and it's going to make a good deal of money. They like me with and here I am in this sort of smaller area in the South, and I'm working here and there for some producers, you know, for some music people, and blah blah blah. This one's the big time. Of course, I'm going to go to LA. I have that opportunity. It's a step up for me. Wow. I can really start working with much more talented musicians, supposedly, but not necessarily, by the way, because, you know, these musicians that have made it aren't necessarily better than the musicians that are around here that have played for many years and without, much fanfare. They might be better connected, they might be slightly better technically, but, or they, whatever, they might be better songwriters or not. Because I see that talents about your ability to play the game. A lot of it is that, without getting into a lot of discussion about music. But the point is that if you're ambitious, you want to go to LA in the big time and do movies or do production or do whatever it is among a lot of well-known and well-off people, you know? So that's not helping community. Oh yeah, we'll have this little community here. So my experience is that yeah, you can build up. People are really tendency have a tendency to bind together. So I've been parts of little communities that just form spontaneously. But the reality of our world, the world we live in this country, is that then they split off. They each go to other opportunities, or they're fed up with you, or they don't like what you have to say. They disagree with you, but they don't want to hassle with you. They just go somewhere else, or they have issues of one kind or another, and they just kind of drop out because they're feeling bad or whatever. It happens, and it's happened all the time. I've been parts of these little communities for a few years, and then boom, they're spread out. Not necessarily a bad thing. I think movement and dynamic movement is important, but the balance is way off into this instability area where there's very little trust normally. There's very little connection. I've been involved in situations when I've really needed help, and people just turned away because they didn't want to take a chance and help you out. It was too much effort and blah blah blah. Yeah, it happened. Who's going to help you? You're going to go to the bureaucracy to get help? I don't, my experience with bureaucracy is having been also part of the bureaucracy or two, is that they don't care. They just care about their job. If they don't help you out and that is their job, the boss is looking at you and what you're doing, then yeah, they'll help you reluctantly. But if as is happening in most areas, in most corporations and government and everything else, if as they increasingly become more and more corrupt, as there's increasingly less trust, they'll they'll just do what they can and not much more, and then go home and live their real lives. So this connectedness is not here. So we have to deal with a society that isn't helpful for those of us particularly those of us who've been damaged, who are traumatized, who need connection and need help, need sustainment, needs care, need to be cared for so that they know that, well, they can't get too far off here. I can't leave my job. I hate my job, and I've heard this a million times. I'm being victimized. My bosses are cheating me. They're taking advantage of me. Blah 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 blah. I've heard these endless stories, particularly at lower levels, where those of us who are sensitive end up often. And this is just not good. It doesn't help. It doesn't help the bosses who are assholes. So these asshole bosses, they get a free ride. They can be assholes constantly and mess you up and take credit for what you do and not really do much of anything. And so that's what the bureaucratic mental. Once you know how to navigate bureaucracies and know the little tricks of the trade, you can spend your entire career doing that kind of shit. And who cares? Because maybe your turnover, there's a lot of turnover in your industry. So you just, hire somebody else and do the same thing. And it in large corporations and particularly government, because government has no accountability, very little accountability. If you mess up, because I've worked in government, I know that most intimately. If you make a mess out of something, eh, next year, next budget, you get the same budget. Doesn't matter if you fuck up. Doesn't matter how bad you are. You're just gonna go on year after year doing the same stupid stuff. And I've seen this directly. I've had to clean up applications that other people, um, who were friends of the person doing the contract, uh, they just kept them going and they didn't produce anything. It just I mean, just really obvious corruption is just constant in government, and it spreads. It spreads from Congress, who get paid off, who get bribes, who get if they don't do this, then they'll get some big interest group of a certain, whether it's the finance capitalists or the entertainment industry or the news industry or a certain country in the Middle East that doesn't have any accountability at all and a lot of money. You just do whatever they want. That's toxic. And this is what we're experiencing. And this is why this framework that is a part of our society right now needs to go from top to bottom. It needs to go because it is not built on trust. It is not built on joy and love. It is not built on all the positive things that we're talking about in these videos that sustain us. That those of us who go deeper need that help, need that praise, if you want to call it that we are trying to heal our society. So that's something to think about, and we'll see you next time. Bye.